We're going to wait about 1 minute before starting to allow more people to join. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled that you have joined Systems Change Lab for our data platform training today. As a quick introduction to myself, my name is Kathleen Nagel, and I am the product manager for Systems Change Lab. I guide our product strategy to ensure that our data platform is successful and meets the needs of our users. We're going to start off the training with a brief introduction to Systems Change Lab before I pass it over to Tappan Parker, who is our Outreach and Engagement Manager. He will be giving a demonstration of the platform and show you how you can use it. So to start, what do we mean by systems change? We define it as shifting the component parts of a system and the patterns of interactions between these parts to ultimately form a new system that behaves in a qualitatively different way. We live in a world built of countless systems. There are small ones like our own bodies or our local bus system, but there are also large ones like our power systems, our governments, our finance system, and of course, the crucial ecological systems that we depend on. To limit global temperature rise, halt biodiversity loss, and build a fairer economy, nearly every major system will need to transform. This includes things like how we power our economies, how we grow food, build cities, conserve nature, and beyond. And additionally, cross-cutting transitions also need to occur in our political, social, and economic systems. By using systems thinking, we know that these changes are complex and interconnected, and we can't change one system without changing others. We also know that there are no silver bullets. So for example, a shift to electric vehicles is not effective at reducing emissions without a shift to clean energy as well. Systems Change Lab was created in response to this urgent need for a systemic lens that can align us on the transformational changes that are needed. Here at Systems Change Lab, we are focused on 3 pillars, which you can see here on the slide. They include monitoring, learning and sharing, and nudging and campaigning. Our open source data platform and our annual State of Climate Action Report aims to accomplish our first pillar by monitoring progress towards the transformational shifts needed to protect both people and the planet. You can picture our platform as a virtual situation room that showcases research, analysis, interactive dashboards, and data visualizations. We highlight the crucial shifts that need to occur across our global systems in order to promote and track the changes needed to create real systemic change in our world. Our demonstration today will include highlights from our 5 systems that are published: power system, industry, transport, finance, and technological carbon removal. We will continue to release additional systems on a rolling basis until the platform has a total of 15 systems. Keep an eye out for our monthly newsletter for updates on what systems will be released next. As you will soon see on our platform, we've identified more than 70 critical shifts across major systems. These shifts range from phasing out coal and unabated fossil gas, to extending financial services for underserved communities, to restoring degraded and deforested land. These shifts can work together to disrupt the status quo and create a system-wide change. So within each shift on our platform, Systems Change Lab measures how much progress has been made towards our 2030 and 2050 science-based targets. As an important note, targets don't tell the whole story. There are many other factors that can drive or prevent transformational change. So within each shift on our platform, we've also identified enablers and barriers. These enablers and barriers fall into one of 5 categories seen here, ranging from innovations in technologies to behavior change to regulations and incentives. With that, I'm going to take a pause, and we're actually going to pass it over to Tappan to demonstrate where you can find all of this information on our platform and how you can use it. During the demo, please submit any questions using the Q&A feature, and we'll address as many of your questions as possible after the demonstration. Take it away, Tappan.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. It's great to have folks here. Just give me a second to get my screen share up and running. Just confirming that everyone can see that. And yeah, we'll be good to go. So again, great to have everyone here. I'm going to be spending the first half of this demo briefly walking you through the various bits of the platform. As you can tell, we're kind of jumping right into things here today. So really what I'm hoping to do is help explain where everything is, where you can find different pieces on the platform, hoping to give you some tips and tricks for navigating everything we have. And then also taking you in more depth through all of our different terms that Kathleen just went over. And then even diving into some concrete examples of the kinds of stories that you can tell using Systems Change Lab. And then more broadly, how you might be able to use this in your work. And then we'll open things up for Q&A because we would love to hear from you and also, be able to answer some of your questions as well. Before I really dive too far into this, I do want to preface that there is a lot here on the platform. So really what I'm hoping to do today is not just show you everything that we have, but really help you understand how you can navigate around Systems Change Lab. A lot of what we have on the platform isn't just covering, what we need to do, but also really trying to tackle and unpack the complexities that exist in terms of acting, in terms of making all of these different choices that we need to make to really tackle our global crises. Really what we cover here on the platform is focused on that global level. How do we tackle these challenges globally? How do we do it as different actors? What targets do we need to track to make sure that we're actually making the progress we need to make? And can we really say that we're making that progress? As well as what actions we might be able to take to help us achieve those targets, help us achieve those shifts that we're talking about. One thing that we'll eventually tackle on the platform, and we aren't quite doing yet, is something around connections. So I just want to mention that up front. But that's something that we're hoping to get on the platform very soon that will help better untackle these dependencies, unintended consequences, and so on and so forth. So really what we're trying to do here is provide you with a framework for how we can achieve systemic shifts across our entire way of living. So one way of thinking of this then is that we've done a lot of this research so that you don't have to, and so that you can focus more on implementing high impact solutions and not trying to figure out what are those high impact solutions in the first place. So let's dive in. So to start, this is our homepage. This homepage provides a really broad overview of Systems Change Lab, our terminology and definitions. You can see here we have an interactive pinwheel that allows you to see all of our different systems and shifts that we currently have online. We also provide some definitions around our different terminologies. So here you see that we're starting to define what those shifts are. You also get into what are our different targets, what are the different statuses we offer on the platform, how do we define those? And then as well, the enablers and barriers that were mentioned earlier, trying to get into what are those, why do they matter, how do they play into things? Before then getting into some of the stories that we're really excited about and some of the things that we're really hoping that you can watch. I do want to flag that this page is actually in the process of getting updated in the next few months, and we'll be creating a dedicated Systems Change Lab 101 page that further helps explain these definitions and these concepts so that this homepage can really focus on helping you navigate and get around the platform. But really the core thing we're hoping for you to understand here is just the distinction between systems, shifts, targets, and then enablers and barriers. I'm actually going to start here by jumping to our shifts page, because I think this is probably one of the most important things that we offer as Systems Change Lab is this framework. What is driving change across these different systems? What kind of change are we hoping to see? And then allowing you to dive in to understand the targets and the enablers and barriers, but really starting from that, what is that broad level of change we're hoping to see so that you can understand that story of where progress is and isn't being made, how we might say that the power system is changing, what we really need to see, or even something as simple as in quotes, as how are we doing with finance and what really needs to happen in terms of financial shift to really say that that system, which is very cross-cutting, is really creating and enabling the change we really need to see in the world. So for instance, you can jump in here and just see that for finance, we're talking about measuring, disclosing, and managing climate and nature-related risks, scaling up public and private climate finance for climate and nature, extending economic services to underserved groups, pricing greenhouse gas emissions, and then as well eliminating harmful subsidies. So those are some of those key things. But the other thing with this page is that you can also get a sense for what else is coming to the platform. So we only currently offer 5 systems, but we have a lot that we're getting ready to bring in next year, including cities, buildings, all of our natural systems, and more of our cross-cutting systems, including things like the circular economy, new economics, governance, social inclusion, and equity. And here you can get a sense for what we'll be really focusing on and talking about for those different systems. So you don't need to wait for us to have data to really see that what this framework is that we're talking about. And also, I think this page is just very helpful as a sitemap, so that you can kind of get a guide through what are the different pieces that you might be interested in looking at. So for instance, if you wanted to jump to power, you could click on the power system, or you could click on one of these shifts here to be brought to one of those pages, or even click on an indicator itself to just be brought straight to some of the data. So let's actually just start by diving in there. So if we jump to, let's say, power, we can jump in either from here or on this left-hand sidebar to get to the power page. And we're immediately brought to a page that's trying to give you a sense of everything that's important to understanding the state of the power system as it is now, where we are, where we might be going, and what data points are really key to understand to help you navigate the complexities here. So at the very top here, we start with some highlights, so some key data highlights about the power system itself that help to try to unpack that. If you've only got a few seconds and just want to get a sense for what's up with power, this is where you can come for that. If you want to see more about the data sources, we always provide that information. And then as well, you get the 4 shifts that are needed in power on this right-hand side before seeing all of the different indicators that we're tracking for targets for progress down below. We then jump into a summary of the system, which this provides you, again, that sense of where are things currently, how is that global state of play, where are there opportunities for us to make progress here, as well as providing some charts to help you make sense of that before also just diving into what does a transformed system look like? What does it really mean to say that the power system has transformed by 2030 or 2050, and what are we really trying to focus on for that? We then dive into these different shifts and give you little quick snapshots of what is that shift, why does it matter, what are those different indicators that are related to those different shifts, and then also providing you at the very bottom some data as well, so that you can see what are those indicators we're talking about and what are some of those data points. If we jump into one of these shifts, say scaling up zero carbon electricity generation, we can actually dive in and start to get a real sense for what the data is saying, what we are looking for in terms of a transformed shift, and how we get there. You'll see that it's a very similar page to the power system from the start. You've got those highlights, you've got the other shifts in the power system, as well as those targets that we were talking about up top, and a quick explainer for the shift. But then we really start to get into the data itself. You also notice on the left-hand side that as I'm scrolling, this will be taking me through the different sections for data insights, for targets enablers. You're able to jump around using these as well. So if you just want to get straight to the targets or you go back to the summary, you're able to do that from here on the sub-navigation. But to start on this page, what you're able to really access from the top is a summary of what our data is showing. So for these 4 different targets, where we're assessing progress, what that progress looks like, what the targets we're aiming for are, And where we don't necessarily have all the data, we try to provide this cannot calculate status, but sometimes that can mean that either we don't have data, we don't necessarily have a scientifically agreed upon target, or it just means that we don't have enough data points to really be able to make that assessment yet, but we do know what the target is and we do have some data. So just to flag that status here doesn't mean there's no data, it just means that there's a reason why we can't give it a status yet. And as you can see here, there's actually quite a lot of data in terms of renewable share of total capacity, annual capacity additions, renewable electricity capacity in developing versus developed countries. And you can see that we just lack targets in all of these instances. Further down, you can actually then dive into those enablers and barriers that we were talking about earlier, which really start to show you more about the enabling environment that's really allowing for these transformations to occur or not to occur, where these are really where we start to see, is action occurring, and what do those actions really look like? Is that action really driving change in the way we're hoping to see it happen? If we dive into any one of these indicators, what we'll see is a chart view and then a brief couple paragraph description of that indicator itself. Within any of these charts, you have a lot of data to play with. So you can scroll around, you can see these different data points and interact with the chart. You can see not just the 2030 target, but where we have them, a 2040 or even a 2050 target. The other things you have here are things like an assessment of whether or not we think exponential change is likely for this indicator. So even though zero carbon electricity sources and generation is currently trending to be off track by 2030, we don't think that actually is an accurate representation of what will happen for this indicator. We think that we will probably see rapid growth over time, and that we may be likely to hit that 2030 target as a result. Even though it's currently tracking as off track, we think that exponential change is quite likely for zero carbon electricity generation. As well, here you can also see where we're pulling the data from. If you are interested in embedding our charts on your website, there's an option to do that. You can also download the chart if you need to use it for your personal work or in professional work, for presentations, for things like that. And this is just a quick download button. It will download the chart as it is. And then as well, an option to share a link to this if you'd like. Up high, you can also see that we have this, this I button, which what this I button does is it's basically a modal that will show you a lot of different context around the indicators. So the context below is really just helping you to understand why this indicator is important, what's going on with it. But if you're really interested in where the indicator is coming from, why there might be challenges with the data, all of that different stuff, you can really start to dive in to understand that historical data, the current trends, more about that methodology, as well as diving in to visit those data sources if you just want to go to the original data source itself. I will note that our methodology page has a lot of more robust information on this, and I will dive into that briefly later on, but just to flag that this isn't the only place that you can get this information. So within each of these charts, there's actually a few different chart views that we offer. So there's this timeline view for where we have global data, as well as usually a yearly change chart where we have multiple years of data. And this will just show you year over year the percent change. So we think this chart is actually quite important to help tell that story of where we're seeing acceleration. So you can see from 2021 to 2012 that there wasn't a ton of acceleration or deceleration even for zero carbon sources and electricity generation. It was more or less moving up and down in not quite a stagnant fashion. But then over the past few years, we've seen year over year change of approaching 2% and getting much higher than 2% year over year of growth in zero carbon electricity generation, which we think tells a powerful story of how much action is actually occurring over the past decade in terms of growth here. Further down, you can get more data. on these different things. So if we jump into renewable share of total capacity, we again have that yearly change chart, and we can see that, again, we're seeing a lot of growth year over year for this. But what we also offer for some of these indicators is country level data. And there's a few ways that we offer for you to kind of dive into that. One is just a map view. So this map view allows you to just see across the entire span of the globe, where do different countries stand. You can zoom in to different countries to see what's going on. So if you wanted to just zoom in more on Africa and just scan around these different countries, you have that option to see how they're trending. If you're particularly interested in seeing year over year change as well, we have a few ways for you to do that. So if that hover will just move, you can click on this time slider in the top right-hand corner, and that will actually move the different indicators and actually show you year over year how things have changed. It's a cute little feature, but also if you wanted to see, say, 2015 data for Africa, you're able to dive in and start to scan around for that. I'll also show you later how you can download all this data as well. On that timeline view, you also have the option to look at this by country. So for instance, if you want to see, you're less interested in global data, you really want to see for something like the European Union, how things are trending, you have that option to dive in by that. Or if you're interested in seeing it by a few different countries, say you want to compare the European Union with Brazil, China, and maybe one or two others. Let's pick El Salvador and Finland to really get a comparison there. You can compare all of these different points. And I believe the amount you can select here is up to 10 different countries that you can compare data for and start to get a sense for how things are trending regionally or between countries to really start to dive into that analysis. Further down, we have a few other options as well, including a disaggregated view where, again, we have that data. You'll hear me say that a lot. Really, a lot of these chart views depend on what data is publicly available, where we have good data on the platform and where we don't. And where we don't have that data, we do try to tell you why we haven't been able to get the data we'd like to be able to show you. But again, where we have data, we're able to provide these deeper dives into these different indicators. So in this instance, for annual capacity additions, we have this data by technology. So you can see for wind and solar, for hydropower, even for bioenergy and geothermal, what those capacity additions look like year over year. And you can see that as an area chart or even as a disaggregated view if you just want to see what those have been trending like without having that stacked chart view. And then finally, one other indicator I want to show here is within enablers and barriers. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom here, there's this number of jobs in renewable energy. And the reason I want to show this one is this is one of our few that actually has a lot of data behind it and where you can start to see all this working together in practice. So this is one of those few where we actually have a lot of country level data. Unfortunately, it is only for the year 2020. But if you were to dive in here, you could see the map view, you could disaggregate and look at where we're adding jobs in terms of these different areas. If you wanted to dive in, then you could pick, say you wanted to see how the United States is trending here. You have that option to dive in then and look at how the US is trending across these different kinds of jobs and where jobs are being added. And you can do that country by country. We don't currently offer this as a disaggregated view or a comparative view between the area charts and the disaggregated, but you can still do that in the timeline. So you can jump in and compare a few of these different data points. And then, yeah, hover over and see how these are comparing. So next, I kind of want to jump into our dashboard. So these are all of our shift and system pages will kind of follow the same format where you're going to have a longer description at the top and then all of the data that you can kind of dive into. But that's just one way of really diving into what the platform has to offer. If you come to our dashboard, you have a few different views that you can use here. One is our pinwheel view, and this is just meant to provide kind of a global overview of all of our systems, all of those different target statuses, where we're trending, where we're not, where we're making progress. So if you wanted to see, say, just broadly how transport is doing across the board and kind of get that comparative view, you have that option. And you can also click into things and just quickly see what the data is showing if you don't want to have to dive in and start scanning through everything. So this is a nice kind of overall graphic that you can use to understand everything on Systems Change Lab. But the really exciting view here, and I think the really powerful dashboard that we have, is our grid view. What our grid view is all of our data, essentially. So if you were to scroll through all this, it's an overwhelming amount of stuff that we offer. And this is just across 5 systems. As we continue to add systems, there will just be more and more and more data coming on here, which will make it even harder to scroll through everything. So what this allows you to do is to start to filter down to find specific pieces of data across systems. So you're not just forced to look at this system by system, shift by shift. You can really start to get into some nuanced analysis here. So for instance, if you wanted to look at indicators that specifically relate to energy, you could type into this filter bar, look for those different indicators, and then get a quick view of all of the data that we have that is specifically about energy. You can see here, it's things like populations without access to electricity, cost of capital for low carbon technologies, starting with renewable energy, battery storage capacity, all of these different things, even women in the renewable energy workforce. And then as well, you aren't just forced to look at this by targets, you also have the option to look at this by enablers and barriers. So if you want to look at energy in this case, you can see that we actually have quite a few of these enablers and barriers. And so if you wanted to filter down further, you can filter down, maybe you're just interested in energy technologies. You could just dive in by that and look for where we're looking for innovation, where we're looking for progress in that sense, and look for those kinds of indicators. You can also filter down by specific systems. Say you're not interested in seeing indicators related to finance. You have that option as well to filter down just for, say, maybe you're just looking across power and you want to look across different shifts. You have that option. You also have the option, of course, to see just which indicators are off track. So you could filter down by that as well if you just wanted to see across the board, what do those indicators look like? Or maybe you're only interested in looking at those that are heading in the wrong direction. A couple other ways you might want to use this, if you're not interested in looking at statuses, but you're more interested in some of the more nuanced things. Maybe you're looking in particular for indicators around jobs. You can dive in, and obviously we don't have a lot here for our targets, but for enablers and barriers, we have quite a few indicators related to jobs. Or maybe you're interested in looking at corporate action as well. You could type in and look for indicators related to that. So I already mentioned this indicator. So this is the dashboard. This is our system pages. It's a lot of the meat of where our data and our analysis lives. But there's still actually quite a bit more that Systems Change Lab offers that I want to cover. So I've already mentioned that there's this button to look at the indicator sources. So this is one way of understanding where our data is coming from. But you also have the option of diving into our methodology, and you can reach this by clicking on our research tab. Our methodology provides a lot of information for why we did what we did, why the Systems Change Lab is the way it is. If you wanted to dive in, there's a full technical note that you can read, but you also maybe are just interested in one specific system, one specific shift, one specific indicator. And we provided this data available in charts for you to be able to quickly find the information you're looking for on that. So if you wanted to know why we're picking flexible power demand, why we think that's important, there's a bit of a write-up here on that, as well as more that just explains the overall selection of targets and indicators here. This is how you can learn about that. If you're interested in just downloading our data, you trust us, you've read the technical note, or you just want to see what we have and combine that with your own data, there's an option to also download data right here. So there's a few ways you can use this. One is just you can download everything that we have available. There's a button for that. It'll just download everything as a zip file and you can explore that at your leisure. Or if you like, you can dive in and start to look for data, specific data maybe around income. And you can dive in and start to find those data points and download that. There's a checkbox here, so if you wanted to select a few and then download, you can do that as well. You can also search by data type, by data source, by system and shift. There's quite a few options for that. If you want to cite us as well, there's information on our licensing page on how to do that. You can just come down here and this is how you can cite us, as well as information on some of the other data that we're using, for instance, from the International Energy Agency. So we have some of that data available on the site, but isn't available for download, and this is how you can cite them as well. Some of the other stuff that we have here, so you notice that there's this research tab, which has a bit of information again on our shifts, on our publications, like the State of Climate Action Report. We have a new report coming next month for 2023, so look out for that, as well as more on our methodology, our previous State of Climate Action Reports and more. But that doesn't cover everything that we're currently publishing and a lot of the analysis that we do as well. So you may have, if you're signed up for a newsletter, you should be getting alerts about these, but we do have a lot of news and new analysis that we're doing here, as well as webinars that we publish. So some of the things that you might be able to read about are, for instance, we've just recently published 2 really powerful articles showing countries that are adopting electric vehicles the fastest, and then countries that are scaling up renewable energy the fastest as well. These articles are really trying to give you some in-depth analysis of where we're seeing progress and why that progress is being made and how we might be able to translate that to other countries around the globe to really help you better understand the state of play. We also, though, aren't just publishing those. We're also helping to publish some really big deep dives into these different systems. So in addition to those system pages we have, if you're just looking for a blog that really starts to dive in and explain everything with some cool charts, these pages here are these really deep dive explainers for each of our different systems that really try to help you dive into what's really important. So say if you're looking at finance, what does finance really look like? What is the current state of finance versus where we need to be by 2030? How are these different things playing out, and what's really important for us to be understanding here? You don't just want to have a bunch of indicators that you're looking at and try to make sense of that on your own. Again, I also want to point to our webinars and events. So obviously this is one of them, our training here, but we also publish a lot of different events and webinars, fireside chats with experts from around the world, which you can come and register for or attend. And if you miss these, we always make sure to publish the recordings on the website afterwards. So you don't have to worry about it if you can't make these. We always make these recordings available. So that really is kind of covering everything that we have on the platform. We also have, of course, a frequently asked questions page, and of course, you can always contact us if you have questions. So really to kind of start to get into some of those stories and how do you use Systems Change Lab. One thing you may have noticed is we don't necessarily have a lot on emissions. And maybe that's a weird place to start, but if emissions is something that you're really passionate about, if you really want to understand emission profiles of different countries, where the global state of emissions are, where most of our emissions are coming from, Systems Change Lab currently isn't the place for that, but I would highly recommend you check out WRI's Climate Watch, which gives you these really detailed analyses of country emissions, how countries are doing in terms of their nationally determined contributions, what those are, and how they're meeting the Paris Agreement goals. But part of the reason we chose not to currently focus on emissions profiles is that if you just look at emissions profiles, we kind of already know what we need to do. It's decarbonize all of the things we're working on. When we start to introduce emissions profiles for each of these solutions, it can give this false sense of what the priorities are without really starting to tackle those complexities. And again, what we're trying to do here is help unpack everything that is going on. How do we understand complexity and make it simple? So for instance, when we talk about those finance reforms, on their own, those don't necessarily lead to emissions reductions. Getting us to price greenhouse gas emissions or even just scaling up public finance doesn't necessarily directly lead to emissions reductions. But those are so critical to establishing an enabling environment for solutions and investments that will reduce those emissions. And so we want to really make sure that we're providing that full picture of why solutions are important and helping you prioritize and understand impacts beyond just the reduction in emissions, beyond just those numbers, and really understanding what are other ways that we can measure impact. So what are kind of those stories that we can tell? So if we jump into that power example, and I'm going to jump back to renewables for just a second here. We can always get a sense here of where are we in terms of our target for renewables. Are we making progress? Is that progress enough? But it doesn't actually tell us what we expect is going to happen in the future. And for that, one of the things that we can use is we can use those enablers that we were talking about earlier. If we really want to get a sense for how things are trending, that's actually the place that you can start to get that information. Because targets tell us where we are, how far we have to go, but enablers tell us how likely that trend is to shift over time. So with enablers, what we can start to get into here is some of those leading indicators on things like jobs, investment ratios, corporate procurement that can really tell you, is action occurring, and is it occurring at the scale and pace we need to make progress on our targets, to make progress in this shift? Is that action enough, or is it insufficient? And so using systems change log, we can help point you towards those areas where it might be easy and also more difficult to transition. Looking at those targets, we get a sense of what's happening, where progress is being made, but also where it isn't. But with these enablers, we can really get a sense of where can we move that needle? Where are there these levers or these actions that we can take that will help make that progress, and also identify, where might there be risk because we aren't acting fast enough or we aren't putting enough effort into these different pieces. To give another example of this, if we jump into industry and say go to electrifying industry, or actually let's use commercializing new solutions for cement, steel, and plastics. I think this is a great one because if you dive in on this, there's really not a lot that's happening yet in terms of green steel, green hydrogen, and green cement, because there just hasn't been enough research done. These are still solutions that are being scaled up in time. And so looking at the data as it is, it might be a little distressing. But if we can dive into that enabling environment, we can get a better sense of where technologies are trending. So if we look at those examples of low carbon steel, we can actually see that there's quite a few projects that have been announced just over the past couple of years that are going into low carbon steel. That doesn't currently help us right now in terms of putting low carbon steel in the market, but we expect that many of those projects over time are going to become operational and then help us get to those targets that we have. And so looking at these two combined, we can see the announced number of projects, and then as well when we expect those to become operational. And we can expect after that occurs, we'll see some of these indicators above related to carbon intensity per ton of steel and the production of near zero emission steel to really start to ramp up and increase, and to see those emissions drop down as well. So these are some of the things that you can use to understand that. We also take maybe a similar approach if you think about direct air capture, which is still one of those very, very nascent technologies, which even over time, our target is very low for this. If you start to dive in for technological carbon removal, we can see here that just for 2030, our target for the number of megatons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere is still quite low for 2030 because of how nascent the technology is. But if we start to dive in, we can see that there's a lot of action here. There's becoming a lot of interest in direct air capture removal from governments, from the amount of investment that we're seeing in these solutions, the number of companies that are coming online to do this and are interested in this. And then we can see that based on that, we expect there to be this growth, but really this explosion in change in this indicator between 2030 and 2050 in order for us to meet our target. So these are just a few of the things, some of the stories that you can look at and start to tell around where technologies are trending, where we stand with things. So some of the things that maybe you can do with this then are, of course, seeing where those key solutions and technologies are trending, but also understanding where change is and isn't happening to better understand where global and local efforts are needed to help move the needle forward, or where they're already moving the needle forward, like we saw in terms of those case studies earlier with renewables and electric vehicles. We can really use these measures of progress then to understand where stalled transformations are in need of action and investment, and then understand those key levers of change that can inform policies, help you prioritize what to focus on, even help you with investments into solutions. We don't have everything, of course. Systems Change Lab is, we're trying to help simplify complexity, and with complexity, there's always more that we could be adding into here, but we've tried to identify some of the most critical pieces for you so that you can really focus again on that implementation side of things. To kind of end this demo here, we always consider Systems Change Lab to be a work in progress. We, of course, have much more coming down the pipeline, including more systems, more case studies, more webinars, new research into how systems connect to one another. And we're constantly working to update and improve this site. So if you have comments on our systems, feedback on how the platform works, data you think we should be including on the platform, or just improvements you'd like to see, we'd love to hear from you. With that, I'll turn it back over to everyone else and take it to Q&A. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tappan. That was really wonderful. So as a reminder to all, if there are any questions you'd like us to answer, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible during this training. So to start, I'm actually going to take the first question. We've received quite a few questions about our data on agriculture, forestry, land use, and cities. We do plan to publish these systems on the platform in 2024. But in the meantime, you can actually find detailed data and analysis on these sectors in our annual State of Climate Action report. Our 2023 report is going to be published next month and will be found on our publications page once it's available. So getting into the fun questions, Tappan. First question for you. Where can I find the data sources that are used on the platform? And actually adding on to that, how can I download data for only those specific topics that I'm interested in?
Yeah, so those are both good questions. I'll go back to sharing my screen quickly. So let's start from data sources. So if you're interested in data sources, I actually happen to have a good source right here, a good example right here. You can always click on this iModal to see where data is coming from for different indicators. In some cases, we're actually pulling from quite a few sources to be able to pull together this analysis, both on our targets as well as the different pieces of data that we have here. And also just to note, you can always see the last time that an indicator was updated as well here. So if you're wondering how often we update this, it's quite often. You can see that the last time this indicator was updated was just as recently as last month. And we continue to do that for all of our systems to try and make sure that you're getting the latest data. So that's one way. For all of these, you can always click on this iModal, get the data source, or even from this big chart as well, you can click here and see the different data sources. The other way that you can do this is going to our download data page. Of course, each of our indicators is available here. If you actually want to download specific data or just see data by data source, there's this option to download here. But say you're only interested in power indicators. You just want to download all the data for power. You don't really care about getting everything else. You have that option to do that here. We don't currently, it seems, have an option to just select all once you've filtered down, but you do have the option just to click on the ones where we do have that data available and just download using this button here. If you want to do it by a specific shift, say you're only interested in rapidly scaling up, or maybe you're more focused on coal and fossil gas, you also have the option just to filter down to those specific indicators and then again, pull that data where it's available. In some cases, we do have data on the platform, but we don't have it available for download, and that's usually because of licensing issues. We've tried to make that as clear as possible on the pages themselves. So if you dive into power and go to phasing out unabated coal and fossil gas, you might see that, okay, we do have a bunch of data here, but it's not available for download. I think in many instances, this is related to data coming from the International Energy Agency, and they don't allow us to make that publicly available for download, but you can go to their website and always go back to that data source to find out more and find out more about that indicator.
Great. Thank you so much, Tappan.
Yeah.
So next question, I see that charts have different data available. Some say no publicly available data source was identified. Why is that the case?
So that's a great question. And that actually kind of gets into one of the things that we do a bit differently than other data platforms out there. So when we were developing Systems Change Lab, one of the things that was most important to us was ensuring that we are covering the full scope of solutions that we can, the full scope of indicators that really matter to say whether or not a shift is occurring, to say whether or not a system is transforming. And if you just dive in to where we have data, you won't get a full picture of that, because in a lot of cases, we don't have data that's publicly available. Some data is behind paywalls. Some data is held by private companies or governments that aren't releasing it. Some data just doesn't work well together. You might have a really good data source out of China and the United States, but then the European Union has different data standards, and that data is published differently. And the data is kind of hard to mix and match. So there's a lot of different reasons for why data may be unavailable. But when we were doing this exercise, we really wanted to make sure that we didn't put this out there and then just say, well, we can't get data for this, so we can't publish this indicator. Rather, we'd like to show you that this indicator is important. And we want you to understand that because this indicator is important, that we need to be saying something on it. We need to be focused on it. We need to be thinking about this. So in this case, something like the percent of displaced coal and gas workers that regain employment, we don't really have a good data source for this. But it's so important for us to understand this in context to really unpack that complexity, that we still feel that it's important to publish the indicator, even without a data source identified. You can, again, learn more about why we picked indicators and why we do and don't have data from our methodology page. But this is really part of what makes Systems Change Lab unique, is we're not afraid to publish an indicator, even though we don't have that data. And hopefully over time, we can make data available. We can get some of these data gaps filled, but we really want to be upfront about where there are those data gaps and why they're important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this question is actually pretty related to that. In terms of data gaps, are you actively working to find groups that could collect or provide that missing data?
Yes, we are. So that is an active exercise we're undergoing. Sometimes it's just there is data that exists, we don't know about it. We've tried to be very thorough in going through and making sure that we are publishing data that exists. We are currently working with groups to see where we might be able to fill those data gaps. But we also, we don't know what we don't know. So if you happen to know of data that exists that we can publish or that might work for us, we definitely love to hear from you on that. One of the things that sometimes prevents us from publishing data is that we have a fairly rigorous data standard as well for what we will and won't publish. So that can prevent us sometimes from getting data online. It may exist, but we don't feel that it actually gives an accurate portrayal of what's going on the ground. But that is something we're constantly trying to do, is fill those data gaps. So definitely a work in progress, and definitely would love to hear from you if you have thoughts or can help us with that.
Wonderful. So next question, it's a lot of data questions today, which is really exciting. How often is the platform updated? What is the difference between Systems Change Lab and other platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we try to update the platform at least annually. We're fairly new on the block, as it were. The Systems Change Lab hasn't even been out for more than 11 months. We'll hit our 1-year anniversary next month. we're very excited about. And we have some updates to features on the platform that are coming that we've been working on for the past year, including things like that homepage I talked about, as well as some new pages, some updates to current pages, even some new chart views. So there is some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. And then, of course, next year, we're going to be adding more systems to the platform. But in terms of the data itself, we are publishing annual data. So if you jump in, you'll see that it's year over year. We're not providing data month by month. So we are in terms of that, we're constrained by when data itself gets updated. So for instance, when the IEA publishes their 2020 or 2021 data, that's when we can update the platform with that. We try to make sure that we're updating at least once a year, but if data is coming out more often, we can try to update the platform as often as once a quarter. Anything to add there, Kathleen?
No, actually, I think you captured it really well. Thank you. Moving on then, can I find data both at the global and country level? And if so, where?
That's a great question. So the answer is yes. I'm going to caveat this because I was showing this earlier. There is country level data available on the platform for some indicators. Obviously, it's not for everything. You've seen a lot of examples already where that's the case. As we get more indicators online as well, we'll have more to show there. Just to, again, show this briefly, if you are looking for country level data, where we have it, the indicator will have a map view first to show you that. So in this case, you'll be able to jump in onto the map view, see that different country level data. And then, of course, there's a timeline to, if you want to look for specific countries and see their timelines, that's an option. But there is an issue with the platform, and that's something that we're hoping to get resolved in some of the upcoming updates, which is that it doesn't actually tell you if an indicator does or does not have country level data from the start. So looking at these, you can't actually tell what views we have, and you can't even do that from the dashboard. So one thing we're fixing, again, this should be in the next, I'm fingers crossed, a few months. Kathleen will correct me if that's wrong. But one thing we're going to be adding to the platform, and especially on the grid view, is an option to see where these indicators have country level data, and an option to filter down by that. So just to say, it's something that's available. We do have country level data, and we think that some of the more powerful data that can be on the platform and for these indicators, and we're working to make it easier to find.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just like to also add, in addition to the country level filters that we are going to be adding to the dashboard, our map view on our large indicator charts is also going to be getting some updates over the next few months. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be making announcements in our newsletter once those updates are published. And in the meantime, if you have questions on that, feel free to use our contact@systemschangelab.org email address to send us over any other questions related to this. Okay, so next question then, who is the target audience for your platform, and how can the platform serve different audiences in different ways? For example, business and investors versus CSOs. I think you're muted, Tappan.
That's a great question, and I just muted myself. So we have a few key audiences that we think about Systems Changelab for. Obviously, what we've tried to do here is provide a framework for action, a framework for what needs to happen worldwide, what we need to see happen in terms of systemic change to really say that a system has changed. How do you really say if power has changed if we're still using fossil gas and not using enough renewables? We need to really see those shifts. In terms of who should be using it, we're really focused on a few key audiences. And so one of those big ones is financiers. So really trying to think through funders, impact investors, folks who are really trying to finance the transition, in large part because where the money goes for these solutions, we tend to see action. So seeing increased investment across the spectrum of different solutions is really valuable. But also we want to help guide investors to something beyond just, well, we need more renewables, so I'm just going to put more money into renewables. What does that mean? What does that look like? Really starting to get into what kinds of changes we need to see functionally to see change, but also to say that there's more to invest in beyond just renewables and electric vehicles. There are all of these different solutions that are available, all these different ways that we can finance these transitions. Second would be policymakers really helping to set the ambition level that we really need to see worldwide, country by country, and also helping to show, what that ambition looks like, what good policies might look like. So one of the options you can select here for enablers and barriers is regulations and incentives, as well as strong institutions. And those kinds of things will show you some of the policies that we're going to see enacted in order to say that some of these things are changing. A lot of them are currently in finance, but you can see some examples here. On the flip side of that, we also think that this is a great example if you're looking for targets for CSOs and advocacy groups to be able to use Systems Change Lab to get a sense of what level and ambition we should be pushing policymakers for, and using that as an evidence base to say these are the targets we need to be setting, these are the actions we need to see from policymakers, from companies, so on and so forth. Companies can use this to also get a sense for, okay, well, as a company, what can I do? How do I take action, and what do those look like? Where can I be leaders? You can see that from maybe some of the leadership things or leadership indicators, as well as maybe from innovation. Where do we need to see innovation? Where do we need to see that kind of investment and that kind of action as well? So really thinking through this as a tool for financiers, for policymakers, for advocates, and for businesses. We also generally think that this is a really powerful tool to educate as well, just as something that you can use to understand all the different solutions, where we need to go. And then, of course, one of the other things I think that can be really powerful as well is using this to assess your own impact. So again, going back to that example around, we don't want to just use emissions profiles because that doesn't tell a full picture. You can use Systems Change Lab to get a sense of what are some of the metrics for impact that you should be using to understand whether or not the actions you're taking are actually contributing to global solutions or not. So those are just some of the ways that you can use it, and some of the kind of use cases we've been really thinking about as we've developed this.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we'll do a couple more questions before we end the training for today. So next question, I'm interested in how the platform fosters people participation and learning. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the ways is actually trainings like this. So we think of this as an opportunity to answer your questions, but also really see the platform as something that is meant to be collaborative. So as much as we are trying to train people on how to use it, the more people know how to use it, the more that they can also interact with us and ask us questions and make sure that we're doing our jobs in developing something that works for you. As I said earlier, really, we are trying to make this as something that is doing free research for you. This is a research platform. We want to make this something that works for as many people as possible. So trainings like this are one way. We also offer opportunities to get feedback. So we do user workshops on a regular basis to talk to people, to ask them what's working about the platform, what's not, how we can really develop this and make this better. And we're actually even going to be putting out a survey in the next couple of weeks that will really dive more into that to get some details from folks on what they'd like to see us doing in the future, whether or not this is working for them in the present, and how we can continue to improve. We also, of course, offer our webinars. So webinars are a great way to engage with us through experts, through expert dialogue, or just hear from the people we're talking with more about these different solutions and these different systems. And then we also, we're always looking to talk with people, to have partnerships, and really make sure that we're having an ongoing dialogue around these solutions and how we take action and make change.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. All right, last question for today. Oh, hold on, lost my place on this document.
No worries.
So many questions. All
That's
right.
great. We love questions.
Yeah, no, it is great. So is there a way to suggest new measures to add to your analyses on the platform?
Yes. So two ways you can do that. One is there's this little feedback widget on the right-hand side, which I didn't actually talk about, but If you have feedback and you just want to post it publicly, you can do so here, and folks can thumb up and thumbs down it, provide some comments. That's one way. But the other way is you can always reach out to us or contact us. So contact@systemschangelab.org. You can always reach out to that email address and let us know if you have thoughts or ideas. We'll be happy to answer you there. We're pretty responsive, but maybe give us a week or so if we're not being super responsive. We've got a lot going on this fall.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you everyone for joining our training today. I hope it was informative and taught you a lot of things about the Systems Changelab data platform. We will have a recording that is going to come via email in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. And if you have any additional questions, please use our contact email that Tapan just shared. You can also just follow up via our website as well. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks so much. Ciao.